Alright y'all, welcome back to the channel and to some more turkey patterning, and today we've definitely got a very interesting combo to test, and it's one that should give us a pretty ridiculous looking pattern. But I'm definitely looking forward to seeing what we can get, because with this particular shell and the shot size versus this choke, it could go one of a couple different kind of ways. So I'm looking forward to seeing what we actually can get out of this combo. But as for the shell we've got here today, I brought out some of these. These are some Winchester Longbeard XR loads. They are a 12 gauge 3.5 inch 2 1/8 ounce load of sixes, moving about 1,050 feet per second. So a very big hefty shell, big payload of lead sixes. That's a lot of pellets flying down range. And the last time we tested these shells, they were very impressive to say the least. But what can they do through today's choke? That's going to be the question. And as for today's setup, I brought out the Mossberg 835 Ulti-Mag, but I threw in this choke. This is the stock turkey full choke is what they call it. It's a 710 constriction, which essentially equates to an extra full choke because these 835s are overboard to a 10 gauge bore size. So 710 is roughly an extra full as far as constriction goes. Now this, for being a stock choke, has done very, very well with a lot of turkey shells we've run through it, but this isn't anywhere close to the constrictions that we've tested previously with those shells. It's quite a bit more on the open side. And with these being lead sixes, is that gonna hurt them because they're a little bit smaller pellet that might prefer a little bit tighter choke? Or is it a case of this is a really large payload that might like a little more breathing room and this might really help them? I don't know. It could kind of go either way. Either way, I think it's going to be a ridiculous pattern, but I'm definitely curious to see what the stock, more open turkey choke can do with these big 3.5 inch longbeards. But as for the test today, everything is the same as usual. The turkey paper's at 40 yards, and I've got the chronograph so we can get our velocity out of the shell. So enough talking, let's get you guys to view this target and take this shot and see just what kind of a pattern we can get from these 3.5 inch longbeard sixes through this stock 710 turkey choke today. Okay, so that shell gave us 1194 through the chrono. The boss claim is 1050, so we are quite a bit above that, but that is not really anything unusual based on what we've seen out of these 1050 claim longbeard shells before. They're almost never actually down around 1050. They're pretty much typically high 1100s, low 1200s. So even though we are above their claim, it's not anything unusual. And I think that 1194 is a pretty decent velocity for these shells. But what kind of a pattern did we actually get down there at 40 yards? Let's go check it out and see what we got. All right, so now we're down here at our 40-yard paper, and this is the devastation that we got. And yeah, I gotta say that is pretty ridiculous looking, to say the least. I expected a good pattern, but with it being a much more open stock choke, I expected to see a little bit more broadness than that. Now this pattern is a little bit interesting though. Clearly, I think we have a super hot core, and I think the pattern is actually centered up. Our core is pretty much right exactly where we would want it to be, but it does look like the top right corner flared out a little bit for whatever reason. It's definitely a little bit more broad over off that top right edge, so maybe a little bit of inconsistency in the shell. And we saw a couple little strings down there at the bottom too, so even though I think the pattern is nice and centered up, it might not be the most perfectly uniform pattern we've seen from one of these longbeard shells either. Now clearly, I think we're getting very picky at that point, because this is territory of just not having a head left at 40 yards. You really cannot argue with that kind of a performance there. Even though it is very tight, it still does give you a little bit of leeway. As you can see, we have an inch or two off the left edge, and then obviously a little bit off the right as well that we could move and still get that bird. So definitely nothing short of a very hot, very impressive pattern right there. Now around the edges, we do see a couple of flyers, like there's a couple up there at the very top edge of the paper, and again there's a few down there at the bottom and stuff. But this is a lead number 6 shell going through a stock, much more open choke. None of that is really surprising, and I don't think we have too much room to complain when we have a pattern like that. This is another case of you would clearly run out of energy with them being a lead 6 before you would actually run out of pattern capability. I can tell you pretty much without even testing it that that is a 60-yard capable pattern, but these are lead sixes, so should you really push that bill? Even though it might do it, is it really ethical to use lead sixes at that long of a range? And another thing with these shells is it a little bit of overkill? Maybe, maybe not for some people, but with the extra price and the extra recoil associated with it, sure, it gives you a good pattern, but is it really worth it just over a normal 3-inch lead 6? For me, I don't think it is, but for some people, they really like using the big 3.5-inch shells. So at the end of the day, this is clearly a good enough combination. If you wanted to use a 3.5-inch Longbeard with a stock turkey choke out of that Mossberg, you could absolutely get it done. Okay, and here's the wad from that shell, and as you can see, these ones are red. Typically, the Longbeard wads are gray color. I think that's more so probably just something for manufacturing to designate that this is a 3.5-inch wad, because it is just a slight bit longer, and it's easier to see the difference if it's red. But it is literally the same wad. It's molded the exact same way. It feels the same plastic, all of that. As you can see, you got some of the buffer material stuff they use still down in there, but no pellets. It opened up almost perfectly evenly, or at least very much so realistically. Definitely nothing weird going on. There's no rips or tears or snags or anything. So the wad looks pretty much as perfect as what I would ever expect it to. So definitely nothing too fancy to see here. All right, y'all. Well, what did you think about that pattern right there? That is nothing short of devastation. I mean, that is borderline taking a turkey's head off at 40 yards. So I definitely don't think you're going to have any kind of problems taking that out and getting you a bird with it. That's for sure. And like I already mentioned, I think you'd run out of energy with the lead sixes before you would run out of pattern performance. But on the same token, are these shells really worth it, being a 3.5-inch shell that is more expensive than just the 3-inch versions? They have more recoil. They're harder to find, they're higher price. So is it worth it over the 3-inch sixes, considering we consistently see very good patterns out of those as well? For me, I don't know that it is, but for some people, a 3.5-inch shell is what they feel that they absolutely have to use, and clearly it's a good enough performer, that's for sure, even through a stock choke. That is quite a bit more on the open side. But as always, let me know your thoughts down below. Is that about what you expected to see, or were you a little surprised one way or the other? Have you tested any of the Longbeard 3.5-inch shells? And if so, what kind of results have you seen? Would you hunt with that kind of a pattern? Do you prefer the 3.5-inch shells even at the higher price and higher recoil? Or are you kind of like me and just say the 3-inch versions are plenty good enough for what I would need? Let me know all that down below. But at the end of the day here, you can't really argue with that kind of a pattern. That'll kill a turkey just as good as any TSS shell will out to 40-45 yards. So I don't think we have a whole lot of room to complain here today. But with that being said, I've got some more tests to get done for you guys, so I'm going to get back to it. As always, we have the channel Instagram as well as the mailbox where you can send stuff if you'd like to. All that information will be in the description if you're interested in it, but I'm going to get back to it, so I'll see y'all in the next one.